There is a tree growing right now across India, Southeast Asia, and the dusty edge of northern Australia that produces an oil chemically almost identical to olive oil. It needs almost no water. It grows on land so degraded that nothing else will touch it. For more than 100 years, the seeds it drops by the kilo were classified as inedible and quietly poured into lamps, soap vats, and diesel tanks. The tree is called Pongamia, and by the end of the next few minutes you will understand exactly why it was kept out of your kitchen, who finally cracked the code, and why the cooking oil aisle is about to look very different than it does today. You probably have never heard the name Pongamia, but across half the world it is a familiar shade tree. In Hindi, it is karanja. In Kannada, it is hong. In Tamil, it is pongam. Botanists call it Millettia pinnata. It is a medium-sized leguminous tree with a dense green canopy, a deep taproot that punches through compacted soil, and a quiet history stretching back thousands of years. Indian villages have planted it along roadsides for shade. Traditional medicine used the oil and the bark for skin conditions. Farmers crushed the seed cake into a natural pesticide and spread it on their fields. It has always been useful. It just was never, ever eaten. And here is where the story starts to bend. When you put Pongamia oil under a mass spectrometer, something strange shows up. It contains 50 to 55% oleic acid. That is the same omega-9 monounsaturated fat that defines olive oil. It is the entire health pitch behind the Mediterranean diet, the molecule that gets credited with everything from lower inflammation to better cardiovascular markers. Pongamia oil has it in olive oil quantities. It also has a higher smoke point than virgin olive oil, which means it is more stable at the heat of a real frying pan. In lab analysis, the fatty acid profile is nearly indistinguishable from a premium bottle of extra virgin. If you switch the labels, you could not tell the difference on paper. Now consider what one of these trees actually does. A mature Pongamia produces 20 to 80 kilograms of seeds every single year. Those seeds are 30 to 40% oil by weight. The tree starts producing in 4 to 6 years and then keeps producing for more than 3 decades from a single planting. One tree replaces decades of plowing, sowing, fertilizing, and harvesting that a soy or canola field demands every 12 months. No annual seed purchase, no yearly fertilizer bill, no constant tractor passes chewing up the topsoil. Just a tree standing there, dropping pods. And it does this on land that other crops simply refuse. Pongamia tolerates saline soil where olive trees die. It pushes through drought that flattens sunflower. Its taproot reaches groundwater that soy can never find. Right now in Florida, farmers are planting it on abandoned citrus groves that citrus greening disease wiped out. In Indonesia, researchers are testing it on former palm oil plantations where the soil has been chemically beaten into uselessness. This is a tree that eats degraded land for breakfast. But there is a catch. We will get to it in a moment, and it is the reason this oil never made it onto your shelf in the first place. The catch is chemistry. Pongamia seeds contain 2 compounds called karanjin and pongamol, both of them furanoflavonoids. They are toxic to fish, intensely bitter to humans, and present in enough quantity that the World Health Organization classified the raw oil as inedible. For decades, that single problem ended the conversation. You could not press Pongamia oil and bottle it. You would gag on the first spoonful. So industry did what industry always does. It took the path of least resistance and ran with palm, soy, canola, and sunflower instead. What those 4 crops actually cost the planet is the part nobody puts on the bottle. Palm oil drives the bulldozing of Borneo and Sumatra. Orangutan habitat has collapsed by more than 80% since the 1970s. Soy expansion has cleared millions of hectares of the Amazon. Canola monoculture leans hard on synthetic nitrogen fertilizer and pesticide sprays that drift across watersheds. And nutritionally, all 4 are dominated by omega-6 fats, the inflammatory side of the oil equation. The cooking oil aisle is one of the most environmentally violent corners of the modern food system, and almost no one looking at the bottles realizes it. Enter a small California company called Terviva. Founded in 2010 in the San Francisco Bay Area, Terviva spent more than a decade quietly working on one specific problem. How do you strip the karanjin and the pongamol out of Pongamia seed oil without destroying the healthy fats? They eventually developed a proprietary detoxification process that does exactly that. The result is a clear, neutral, food-grade oil they have branded as Ponova. Over the same years, they planted Pongamia across thousands of acres in Hawaii and Florida, building the agricultural supply to match the processing breakthrough. The first time Pongamia oil legally entered the human food supply was in 2023, when the Aloha Kona bar launched with Ponova oil as an ingredient. A second product, the Pa'akai bar, followed later that year. You can buy them online and in natural food retailers. The FDA reviewed the safety data, and the oil now carries generally recognized as safe status. After more than a century of being classified as inedible, the seed that was buried by chemistry has officially been unburied. And here is where Pongamia separates itself from every other oil crop on Earth. Because it is a legume related to peas and beans, its roots host bacteria that pull nitrogen directly out of the air and lock it into the soil. The tree requires zero synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. It improves the ground it grows on instead of depleting it. That single fact breaks the dependence on the Haber-Bosch fertilizer industry that underpins almost all modern agriculture. The energy, the natural gas, the runoff, the dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico, all of it traces back to the synthetic nitrogen that Pongamia simply does not need. The carbon math is even more striking. Terviva estimates roughly 115 metric tons of carbon dioxide captured per acre over 30 years. Peer-reviewed measurements have already clocked 13 metric tons per hectare after 5 years. The deep root system stores carbon below ground where it stays stable for decades. A single hectare can offset the emissions of multiple American households for the lifetime of the planting. This is not greenwashing. This is a tree functioning as a long-term carbon sink while producing edible oil at the same time. The same karanjin compounds that made the seeds bitter turn out to be a natural insecticide. Pongamia is pest-resistant without chemical intervention. Indian farmers have used Pongamia leaves and seed cake as a crop pesticide for centuries. The chemistry that excluded it from the food supply is exactly the chemistry that makes it ideal for low-input agriculture. You do not have to spray it. You do not have to coat the seeds in neonicotinoids. The tree defends itself. Now, you should be skeptical when something sounds this perfect, because in real life the numbers wobble. A 2022 study titled "Tempering Expectations on a Novel Biofuel Tree," published in Industrial Crops and Products, looked at real-world Pongamia yields and found a wide range. Some plantings produce 2.5 tons per hectare, others produce half a ton. The early projections of more than 1,000 liters of oil per hectare have not been consistently achieved in the field. Genetics and growing conditions matter enormously, and commercial scaling up will depend on selective breeding to pick the winners. The honest answer is that Pongamia at scale is still a work in progress. Pricing reflects that. The detoxification process is proprietary, the production volumes are limited, and Ponova oil today is expensive. You will not find it next to the canola for $4 a bottle. Premium food brands are the early adopters. Analysts expect the price to fall as production scales over the next decade. But right now, this is a niche ingredient, not a commodity. That gap between promise and price is exactly what makes this moment interesting rather than finished. A few more things worth knowing. Pongamia is self-pollinating. It does not depend on bee populations, which matters in a world where pollinator collapse is breaking the math on conventional crops. The trees handle extreme heat, prolonged drought, and even hurricanes. They recover from severe pruning. Lifespan reaches over 80 years in favorable conditions. Hawaii has become an early American hub, with farmers planting Pongamia after the sugarcane plantations folded, and a 2021 study in ACS Omega documented strong fuel properties from the Hawaiian crop. In Florida, the trees are quietly converting hundreds of thousands of abandoned citrus acres into something productive again. For most of modern history, Pongamia was studied only as biodiesel. Indian government programs in the early 2000s promoted it for diesel engines. Australian researchers tested it for aviation fuel. That biofuel focus delayed food applications by decades because while everyone was chasing the next petroleum substitute, the climate economics quietly shifted. Carbon and nutrition are now worth more than diesel. The food-grade pivot, when it finally came, was an industry catching up to its own data. And to be clear, none of this was a conspiracy. There was no shadowy meeting where Big Ag decided to bury Pongamia. The plant was kept out of the food supply by simple economics and one inconvenient chemistry problem. Palm and soy were cheaper, faster, and already had global supply chains. The bitter toxic compounds made commercial food use impossible without expensive processing nobody had yet invented. Industry took the easy road. That is not suppression, that is gravity. The Indonesian restoration work is worth flagging because it shows what this crop can do at landscape scale. A 2021 study in MDPY forests documented Pongamia as a candidate for restoring degraded land left behind by palm oil. Those soils are nitrogen depleted and biologically exhausted. Pongamia rebuilds them while producing oil at the same time. Roots break up compacted ground. Fallen leaves layer organic matter on the surface. Nitrogen fixation enriches everything nearby. Land planted with Pongamia for 10 years measurably improves in fertility. You can heal soil and harvest oil from the same hectare. The big picture math is what should stay with you. Global cooking oil consumption tops 200 million tons a year, and 4 crops, palm, soy, canola, and sunflower, dominate that market. Those 4 crops drive deforestation, soil depletion, and fertilizer dependence on a planetary scale. Pongamia is a tree-based perennial alternative that grows on land already destroyed. If just 5% of global cooking oil shifted to Pongamia, the pressure on rainforests would drop in ways that would be visible from orbit. What has to happen next is not mysterious. Better cultivars need to reach commercial breeders. The detoxification process needs to scale or be matched by new methods. Food companies need to sign long-term offtake agreements so farmers can afford to wait the 4 to 6 years for trees to mature. And you, the person reading the back of a bottle, need to recognize the name Pongamia when it eventually shows up and decide whether it is worth choosing. Markets move when consumers move. So circle back to the tree at the start of this, the one growing right now in places nobody is watching, dropping seeds nobody is collecting, on land nobody else wants. Pongamia was never buried by conspiracy. It was buried by economics and one chemistry problem. That chemistry has now been solved. The trees can grow where other crops killed the ground. The oil matches olive oil for nutrition and beats it for cooking stability. The only remaining question is whether food companies, farmers, and consumers actually want it. If you found this interesting, the next time you are deep in the cooking oil aisle, take a closer look at where your oil actually comes from. You might be surprised how soon the answer changes.